I speak to you in the name of the one holy and living God. Please be seated. Well, it's Mother's Day, so let's talk about mothers. The thing is about mothers, it's that we need them. We need them not only to give us birth, but also to give us value. They give us value by showing us that they value us in the way they interact with us. But not all of us had mothers who were capable of that. So does that mean that we're doomed to a life of fear, anger, self-loathing, incarceration, psychotherapy? I do not think so. I do not think so because mothers are not the only people capable of mothering. Which is to say, the mother who gives us birth may or may not be the one who gives us value. And that, my friends, is where the rest of us are called to action. Each and every one of us is needed by someone to give them competent mothering. Unless another human being treats us as a treasure, we will not experience the deep truth of ourselves that we are inherently valuable. I believe this is why Jesus' cardinal instruction to the disciples and us, love one another, is repeated over and over and over again. Everyone without exception needs to be unconditionally loved in order to know that they are valuable, in order to thrive and participate in society. So rather than wrestle with the question of our biological mothers, better we should ask, who is the person who shows me I am inherently valuable? Well, for me, the answer is, really clear. Aunt Frances. My parents were of the belief that children should be seen and not heard. Spoil the rod, spare the child. There was no sparing of the rod. Emotions were not to be expressed, neither affection. But by contrast, my godmother, Aunt Frances, was infinitely warm and gentle, patient, tender. She wiped away my tears and listened to my stories. She told me great tales, took me to fabulous places, let me know that I was worthy just for being me. Everyone needs an Aunt Frances. Who was yours? You see, not only do we thrive when we receive unconditional love, our life is enhanced exponentially when we allow that love to flow through us to others, because unconditional love expressed heals old wounds, transforms trauma, it reconciles relationships, it diminishes pain, and it restores wellness. Which is why every single one of us not only needs an Aunt Frances, but also needs to be an Aunt Frances. We need to foster the healing, transformation, and wellness of our families, communities, and our country. That's what's lacking now. That's why we see so much chaos and brutality. An exemplary Aunt Frances about whom you have heard me speak is the Jesuit priest John Boyle. He's the founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. Homeboy Industries is committed to affirming the value of former gang members by loving and employing them. And Boyle loves to share this little story, a snippet of conversation that occurred between him and a former gang member at a public event. And Boyle starts it out by saying, you know, Louis, I am proud to know you, and my life was richer when you came into it. Since you were born, the whole world became a better place, even though at times you can be a real pain in the ass. And so Louis smiles and looks back at Boyle and says, the feeling is mutual. And there we have it. A mutuality of love that does not demand perfection. Unconditional love. Competent mothering. For the first 3 centuries of the Common Era, the early Christian church was characterized by just this kind of mutuality of love. What today I'm calling competent mothering. Affirming the value of every single person was the church's driving force until, in the early 4th century, it was institutionalized. It was institutionalized around statements of belief, the protection of tradition, for the consolidation of power. Let's just speak that truth out loud. The early church, the vast majority of people in that Greco-Roman world, their life was chaotic and brutal and drenched in fear. As Rodney Stark, a sociologist and professor of comparative religion, writes, early Christianity served as a revitalization movement in the urban Greco-Roman world. Now think about that. Jesus' movement is a revitalization of culture movement. That was what it was meant to be. And so Stark goes on. To cities filled with the homeless and impoverished, wonder what that would be like. Christianity offered charity as well as hope. To cities filled with newcomers and strangers, Christianity offered an immediate basis for attachment. To cities filled with orphans and widows, Christianity provided a new and expanded sense of family. To cities faced with epidemics, fire, and earthquakes, Christianity offered nursing services. Now remember, Stark is describing the early Christian church, the pre-institutionalized church, and what she did, who she was. Well, I would venture to say that 1,700 years later, life in the world has not changed very much. Would you agree? But the church has. Poverty and homelessness, widows and orphans, newcomers and strangers, epidemics and ethnic violence, and not to mention wildfires and earthquakes, they're raging on today. And even though the church does, do some good, still she labors to maintain her buildings, preserve herself, and decide who is worthy of the sacraments. What the world needs today has not changed. But the competent mothering that characterized the revitalization movement of that early church, our early church, has. I believe it is time for us to admit that we have been telling ourselves the wrong story. Christianity is not about paternalistic, top-down commissioning of belief for the ordering of people and the promising of a happily ever after life. Christianity is about competent mothering. Mothering that fulfills Jesus' instruction to love one another. Christianity is about demonstrating by our actions that we are proud to know one another, that our lives are richer and better because of the other's presence with us. Even then, from time to time, they can be a bit of a pain or a really big one, just like us. In her important and just published this past March, like a month and a half ago, disrupting book, The Church Cracked Open, the Episcopal priest Stephanie Spellers imagines a conversation with a woman in Mark's gospel who breaks every rule and offends every custom when she boldly interrupts a Pharisee's dinner party. You know this story. This woman breaks into the dinner party. Women are not allowed. With this expensive alabaster vase filled with nard, she breaks the vase and pours the healing ointment over Jesus' head. So Stephanie Spellers imagines having a conversation with that woman. And this is what she hears the woman say. You and your church, you are holding a beautiful jar. You are used to grasping it with both hands, tilting and pouring the contents with moderation through carefully crafted spout. Someday you will have to break it open so the contents flow freely, or God will do it for you. She goes on, you and your church, you think loving a thing means protecting and maintaining it exactly as it was handed to you. Someday you will understand what it means to love something enough to let it crack apart and just sit with the pieces. Notice what needs to be removed for the good, and then faithfully piece together what matters most to make something more whole, something more like what God intended. Dear people of God, this is our call to action. It is time to break the bell jar in which the church has chained the windy Spirit of God to precepts, principles, and propositions. It is time for the extravagant love of competent mothering to just spill out, break through our bell jars, and pour over the heads of all people. Because it's competent mothering that heals old wounds. More than webinars on anti-racism and white supremacy. It is competent mothering that transforms trauma and the divisions in our country. It is competent mothering that reconciles relationships with family members who vote the other way. It is competent mothering that diminishes pain and restores wellness to our families, to our communities, and our country. So on this Mother's Day, let us make a vow to break open our jars and let our competent mothering pour out and anoint the heads and hearts of all people. With that, I can say, Happy Mothering Day. Amen.